When you want your spring break to feel like... and your kids' pool day to feel like... and your hotel bed to feel like... ooh, and room service to feel like... because at Hilton, hospitality feels like...
Your cabana's ready. Would you like fresh towels?
It matters where you stay. Book now at Hilton.com. Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Introducing Vertuo Up, the latest in a long line of innovation from Nespresso. It's innovation you can touch, sense, and taste in every single cup. With a 3-second start, easy open lever, and dedicated brew over ice button, it's even easier to enjoy your coffee your way. Sip for yourself. Shop Vertuo Up exclusively at Nespresso.com.
What does it take from playing a guitar in a dive bar to negotiating stadium naming rights and international sports deals?
He said, I just feel unsafe where I'm out. And I said, no problem, I'll come get you where you are.
Vince, did any of that crisis training help you? Or was it something that it was just like PTSD and that severe anxiety?
Sometimes people say, just let it go, just move on, just don't focus on it. It's like, listen, I think all of us that have dark clouds pass through our minds wish that they weren't there. We're not holding on to them for fun.
Did music come into your life? Was that as a young girl, as a teenager? And what role does that maybe play in therapy?
I love music. I will never make a living off of music. I'm just not good enough. I don't have that talent, which is okay.
What does it take from playing a guitar in a dive bar to negotiating stadium naming rights and international sports deals? Today we sit down with Megha Perik, one of few women in the C-suite of major sports franchise, and a trauma survivor and a champion for authenticity. But behind the titles and achievements is a story of recovery, of what happens when life falls apart, and how we find the courage to rebuild it piece by piece. Welcome back to the SwagAbility Show. I'm your host, Steve Wagstaff, and my guest today is Megha Perik. She serves as Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Meg, thank you for taking some time to spend with us on the SwagAbility Show this afternoon.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity and for creating this platform for people to connect about whatever we're going to talk about over the next little bit here.
It's a joy. It's something I put my wheels on the floor every morning to try and do, lift others up. And you have quite a story that I think will resonate well. Not just it did with me, but I know from my audience and many others that have been through some sort of trauma. The best way to start, they always say, is a story at the beginning. But can you introduce us a little bit to Megha Perik? And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that pretty close for English, at least, where life took a turn for you.
Sure. So I really appreciate the kind introduction. Thank you for that. On paper, I am a twice Harvard graduate, undergrad and law school, went to a law firm in New York and was doing transactional work. One of the deals that I worked on was the acquisition of the Jacksonville Jaguars NFL team. And about a year after that deal closed, they asked me if I'd be interested in being in-house counsel and coming to Jacksonville, Florida. So I moved from New York City to Jacksonville, got my first car since high school, and I've been in Jacksonville since 2013. And just professionally, in terms of some of the things that I work on or do, I oversee our legal, government relations, IT, human resources, security, and stadium renovations. And so it's a pretty broad job in terms of I get to touch on a lot of different things and work with people in a variety of different disciplines, which is always interesting. But if you ask me sort of who I am, probably in my head, I still think of myself as like a 16-year-old who loves going to the beach and listening to Bon Jovi. And I really do, I'm a bit of a nerdy introvert is how I describe myself to most people. I love learning. I love being around people who think differently than me. I love learning from other people and connecting with them. And I really wanted to do this in part because I feel like I've had so many unique experiences and opportunities over time. And I just want to make sure that nobody ever feels like they're alone. And so my hope is that by talking with you today and sharing some of my story, we can make somebody who's gone through something hopefully feel a little bit less alone.
Well, let's do that. Let's talk about maybe that night that changed everything for you and what those first few days were like trying to process.
So on May 21st of 2021, it had been, of course, about 15 months after COVID had started. During that time period, completely understandably, work was very busy. So the NFL designated an infection control officer for each team, and I was our infection control officer and was responsible for implementing all of our COVID protocols. At the same time, our sister company, Elite Wrestling, which is a live events touring company which just started touring, anchored in Jacksonville for about 18 months and was performing out of our amphitheater because we weren't able to go on tour anymore. So it was a really busy period of time. And of course, as many people have experienced, difficult time for people health-wise, difficult time for people mental health-wise. So May 21st of 2021 was my first day off since March of 2020. And I was supposed to go to a concert in Dallas. So it had been a busy week of work. I came home from work. I played a little bit of guitar. I packed and I sat on the couch to watch baseball. And as I was sitting on the couch, I fell asleep and woke up to somebody standing over me. And it took me a moment to realize what was going on. And my memory is a bit spotty of the event, but I do remember shouting, and there's some audio from my neighbor's Ring camera, "This isn't right," punching the person in the throat, running out the front door, going to my neighbor's house, sitting on the floor in his kitchen, trying to explain what was going on, but not really able to articulate much, realizing that I needed air. So
This
I went
was
out
a break-in?
Yep.
A burglar?
So I went out to his back patio, got some fresh air, called the police. I have no memory of what that 911 call was like, but shortly thereafter, police came to the building, responded, cleared the area, and then, of course, started interviewing me and my neighbors who were with me at the time about what had happened. And I'm a fairly calm person, and I like to think that, especially because my job can be incredibly demanding at times, I'm reasonably articulate, but I must have just been all over the place in terms of trying to explain what had happened. So about an hour after the police had come, I called our director of team security for the football team, who is a former police officer himself. And he came over and he was really helpful just because he was a familiar face. At calming me down and helping me explain to the police what had happened, and helping me just establish some credibility, because it is incredibly rare that a true stranger enters somebody's home. More often than not, unfortunately, especially for women, if you're hurt in your home, it's somebody that you know. Unit on the first floor of a condo building. And my neighbors, and the back's all fenced in, my neighbors, there were 3 men in the building, in the condo next door, the first condo that he walked by. And he went to mine and saw that there was somebody in there sleeping by herself and decided to enter. And so I was explaining to the police what had happened. And as they left, and as our director of team security left, I said to him, I was like, I have a meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow with our head coach and our GM, and I just don't know if I'll make it. And he just sort of looked at me and he was like, I will tell them if you don't make it. It's okay. The meeting was about another employee who had relapsed into substance abuse earlier in the week. And so somehow at 8:13 in the morning, I woke up, I did myself to get myself together, and I thought, not that other people couldn't handle this situation, but given my involvement earlier in the week, given that this was our, 2 of our highest executives at the team asking to meet with me, and just given the sensitivity of the matter, I wanted to be there because I wanted to help make sure that we handled the situation properly as an organization. So I walked into this meeting. We had it for about 45 minutes. We discussed what next steps were. And then right at the end is when our general manager asked me, he said, are you okay? He's like, you don't have to be so tough. And that's really the moment when I started to break and I started to tear up and I said, I'm okay. I'll be okay. I walked back to my office and I think I was just still in sort of a state of shock at the moment, right? Like adrenaline was just pumping. And I was in my office, I was trying to gather up a few things before going to the police station because they said that they had found the person. It's about 9:30 the next morning. And I'm in my office and our team president, who's a really kind, very, very smart, has been with the team since 2012, man came into my office and he looked like he was about to tear up. And that was sort of the moment that I realized I'm doing my best to hold it together. Maybe I'm not quite realizing just how scary this was, because if he's looking like he's worried, maybe this is a little bit scarier than even I think that it is. And so I went to the police station. To the credit of the man who broke into my house, who apparently was severely addicted to drugs and had been bouncing around and was looking for money, he dropped his wallet in my house. And he confessed. So by noon the next day, and what a rare situation it is for a victim, and I don't take this for granted. By noon the next day, I had the closure, as much closure as could come from the person that did the thing, of him saying everything that she said is right. Like, I broke into her home, I was trying to get money, and from there the police deal with it how they deal with it. And all that I knew in that moment was that it is too soon for me to understand exactly what my body and my brain are going to be going through. I need to be really sensitive to what that is. And I'm usually not the sort of person that's the best at slowing down and taking a rest. I was like, okay, things are going to be different. And so you asked about the few days after. The following day was my backyard trying to just occupy my mind by assembling some patio furniture, threw out my couch, which was a perfectly good couch because I had been sleeping on it. I knew I needed to do something different just for myself mentally. Threw it out, moved my plastic patio furniture inside in a very stereotypical Florida story. And I had a friend who called, and similar to my interaction with our team president, she said, I just feel unsafe where I'm out. And I said, no problem, I'll come get you where you are. And so I realized that there was going to be sort of a level of me dealing with this in terms of myself, and also me making sure, or just trying to think through how to navigate, how do I engage with all the people around me who are coming from a good place, who care about me, and who might be scared for me or scared for themselves. My body shook for about 2 weeks afterwards. I usually read before bed, and it shook in the way that like a dog, if you have a dog that's like listening to fireworks or a thunderstorm will. Couldn't wear high heels for about 2 weeks. And I went to work every single day that I had work, but I just found that I had to adapt to sort of make myself as comfortable as possible. And when I needed to leave, just because I was jumpy around people at times, I would start listening to like my favorite songs and just put my headphones in, pretend that I was going on a call for work, and just take a walk around, and was doing a lot of walking on the beach, a lot of listening to music, and a lot of just trying to regulate my nervous system. And so I found that what was helpful was things that were familiar. So rather than reading before bed every night, for about a month, I watched the old animated Beauty and the Beast until I felt like my nervous system was starting to regain some stability.
How long was it that you figured that the experience that you'd gone through wasn't just an incident that had happened, it was going to be a turning point for your life? Are you able to ballpark a time when you're like, wait a second, this isn't just happened and I'm now over it. This has now changed me in my core, and I might need to get help.
So I knew that it had changed me in my core, to be honest, right away. So that Sunday night, my neighbor texted a group of us of just on the first floor saying that, hey, I think that there might be somebody else outside the front door. And I remember thinking, this person who's 6'5" and a large man has no idea that actually even just sending me that message right now is terrifying to me. Like there may be somebody there, but my brain might be able to handle that knowledge. My body might be able to handle that knowledge in a normal point in time. I was very jumpy, talking to another friend, luckily, and was like, I can't really handle this. I don't have the bandwidth to absorb this information in a normal way because my resilience is down, right? Like my ability to process more fear has gone. And so I knew that immediately. And a few days later, a friend had asked me, he was like, hey, like, when can we go back to normal? Like, when will you be coming back out with us? Like, when will everything be okay? And I said, I don't know. And I really didn't know. What I knew would be important was for me to be aware of how my body was reacting. And it is absolutely true that even to this day, there are times when I feel totally fine. But there are also times when, whether I'm at a concert in the pit, which I've done however many times, but if I feel somebody behind me and I feel surprised, I no longer feel safe and I just want to go home. Or I was out with a few friends a few months later at a bar, and same thing, around 10 o'clock, I was like, and I've traveled the world by myself, walked around New York City in the middle of the night, and it's just not the same. Where it's like, you know what, sometimes I do feel safe, but there are other times where my primal fear is activated. And I've tried to just realize that, it's not and this is a hard thing that probably I, within the last month, have really had to reconcile myself to. It is not a failure of any sort of character that I don't have the same ability to walk around in the middle of the night confidently that I did before this happened.
Of course.
All that it means is that every once in a while, it might be a little bit better for me to have a friend or my husband or somebody else around. And there's no shame in asking for that help, because the reality is that I went through something terrifying and I'm just scared sometimes, and that's okay.
Fear is a valid emotion, not that we need to sit with it. Of course, you react to it. It was given to us for a reason. I think you had mentioned in some of our conversation that you had some crisis training. It was a crisis text line from an incident we'll talk about in a few minutes. But in that moment, or in the after of those moments, did any of that crisis training help you? Or was it something that it was just like PTSD and that severe anxiety? it just trumped everything.
It absolutely helped. And it was probably the most helpful thing that I've ever done for myself in my entire life.
Right.
So this is a little bit unbelievable, I think, the way that I explain it. But so what happened that week is it was quite a busy week of work. And I usually exercise 5 days a week. And that Thursday, which was the evening when the guy broke into my house, I went to the office, but I was going in and out of the office to the gym at the office and getting my workouts in that I'd missed. I did do 3 that day because I'd missed Tuesday and Wednesday. And it was important to me just for my own sanity to make those up. And I like exercising. It just helps, frankly, sort of counterintuitively, it really helps keep me calm and stable. It's how I work out a lot of my emotions. And as I was outside exercising, which is why I always think it's funny when people see somebody not sitting at their desk. When I'm not at my desk, it doesn't mean that work or something else isn't on my mind anyway. I do some of my best thinking when I'm exercising. So I'm out there exercising, and we had a mental health training for the company scheduled for the following Monday. And what I found in 2020 and 21 is that usually in the months of November and March, and also usually on Mondays, is when I would have a lot of people reaching out to me expressing that they were feeling lonely, isolated, depressed, anxious. And I was thinking about some of these experiences that I had had and people reaching out to me. And I remember a friend who reached out to me in April, just a month earlier. And by the time we were speaking, his brain was so in crisis that it was difficult for him when I asked him, what do you think would be most helpful to you? All that he kept on repeating in that moment was, I don't know. And so that Thursday, as I was exercising, Teams messaged our head of HR and our director of culture. And I said, in Monday's training, let me just jump in at the beginning or the end so that I can explain to people the importance of having your healthy coping mechanisms in place before you need them. Because once you're drowning, it's too late to teach you how to swim. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it would be great if you never have to use them, but there's no point in not having your toolbox ready if you need it. And so that was the message that I was going to convey to the company on Monday. And thank goodness that I had even had that thought, because when you are training and when you are volunteering with Crisis Text Line, one of the things they encourage you to do is make sure that, hey, after a session where you're helping other people, be aware of the toll that sometimes that can take on you. And so they encourage you to, as a volunteer, have your healthy coping mechanisms ready, right? Listening to music, watching a movie, whatever else it might be. And so I had some, I needed to add many more, but I was so grateful to have given this sort of tool to realize that, hey, before you are in a state where you're really worn out, figure out what those things are that help regulate your nervous system and help keep you calm.
Trauma, you lost a close friend, I believe, to addiction from a 22-year-old struggle that started with prescription painkillers, if I'm not mistaken. How did that loss change the way you see addiction and recovery?
So my parents still live in the house that I grew up in. And a few houses up the street was not only the friend that I had called that night that the guy broke in, but her brother. And growing up, all of us kids used to play together in the street. And there were times at work, especially having human resources, where issues would come up as it related to employees that were dealing with domestic violence. And I would do my best to handle them, but never necessarily felt fully equipped. After he passed from addiction is when I realized, you know what, there is a real gap in my education or my knowledge base. I have a skills gap here where I don't actually know what the right thing is to say to somebody who might be struggling with addiction. I don't know how to help somebody who may be feeling like they're so alone and so uncomfortable on their own skin, because addiction in the end is a symptom of some other deeper pain. Let me go learn how to do that. I knew that it would not only help professionally in terms of some of these challenges that come up with work that I didn't necessarily feel quite so equipped for, but also personally, because what really struck me about losing him is that we grew up on the same street. We lived in the same place. We went to the same high schools. And I was like, how did our lives end up being so different? And how did I not know what to say to help him? And so I, after he passed, found Crisis Text Line as an organization that offers free training. And in exchange, you volunteer for up to 200 hours is what they ask. I still do it. I did it yesterday, actually, for a couple hours. But that's your payment back, is just continuing to volunteer on their platform and help others. And those tools have helped me professionally, personally, so much throughout my life since I became certified back in 2018. But it was really losing him that prompted me to learn how to more effectively help somebody in crisis. And, I had the best of intentions with him, but good intentions without the right tools to help. It's like I wouldn't operate on somebody who needed heart surgery without the skills to be able to do that. Why did I ever think that I could help somebody who is struggling with addiction or whatever else it is that they're struggling with without knowing how to help them?
How did that realization lead you to the point where you learned about the difference between listening versus fixing?
Yeah, look, I think that it's a very natural human instinct when you see somebody else in pain to want to give them advice. And so I still have on my phone my last text message to him, which is, we are here for you whenever you need anything. You have no excuse to keep on doing what you're doing. Like, you're loved. And what a misguided text message that was, because it was basically saying, I don't understand why it is that you're acting the way that you're acting or behaving the way that you're behaving. Which, if I was in that situation, I now realize just makes somebody who feels alone feel even more alone, right? There wasn't understanding there. There was exactly the opposite, which is there's no reason for you to be doing what you're doing. And so rather than making it sort of a warm place where he felt like he could take off, right, the armor that he had been putting on him, I feel like what I said to him in that moment, unintentionally so, but still probably made him feel a little bit colder. And so my personality also was such that anytime somebody came to me with a problem, my reaction was to let me give them advice. What would I do in this situation? And what I love about the training with crisis text lines, that it asks you to take a step back, realize that the person who is coming to you is just a human being in a moment where they may be struggling and their mind may be cluttered, but they are still the best person to identify what solutions will help. And so it really puts you in a position to be a facilitator for the person who's struggling and to support them and listen with empathy and encourage, as opposed to giving advice or trying to fix. I think some of the wrong things to say, and I've heard it over time, right? So to the point of advice giving, I remember after that guy broke into my house, somebody said to me, well, you should just move. It's like, well, I don't want to move, because I understand why it is that you are suggesting that I move, but I don't want to feel like this person who's already taken away my sense of safety, I don't want them to also take away my home, which, by the way, is the first home that I've ever bought all by myself and lived in. I don't want to give that up. I think that, sometimes people say, just let it go, just move on, just don't focus on it. It's like, listen, I think all of us that have dark clouds pass through our minds wish that they weren't there. We're not holding on to them for fun. Especially for people that I think, and this is something that I struggle with, which is when it comes up in your dreams or your nightmares, right? It's like that. There's nothing consciously that I'm doing at that moment. It's just still on my mind. And I don't know how I let that go. And so what I would say to people is to come from, and this is difficult, right? Because I think it's especially difficult, like the more that you love the person, because you really do just want them to be okay. But there's a difference between wanting someone to be okay and wanting them to get helped. And maybe step one is realizing sometimes that you may not actually be the best person to help from a clinical level or from a medical level, but you can just be there, let them know that they still have value as a human being, that they're not alone, and then work to connect them with the resources that have the information and the knowledge to be able to help with whatever it is they might be going through. And I think that one of the things that you mentioned, sort of the opposite of what I was just saying, which is don't invalidate how someone is feeling, right? So to your point of support, a lot of that is just validation of, it's understandable why you are feeling the way that you're feeling. If you don't feel like you have somebody in your life to go to. And for what it's worth, in this situation, like, my parents love me. They are wonderfully supportive parents, but I didn't necessarily feel comfortable, nor did I want them to deal with the true weight of what had happened to me. And so they are lovely, and I knew that they would always be there for me. But when it came to, hey, I'm having a really difficult moment, it's interesting for me, and it's part of the reason why I want to talk about it more, is it took me about 4 years to find a trauma-informed, somatic therapy-based doctor that could really help. And some of the things that I learned, again, this took a few years to find some of these resources. Many of them, thank goodness, as many ills as the internet and social media can bring us, so too can it connect you with resources if you're not sure where to start or if you don't have somebody in your life. But just learning that, it's normal to have these nightmares, that these sort of traumatic fears live in a different part of your brain, in the more primal part of your brain, than your prefrontal cortex, where memories get sorted in a more rational way. So when I was trying to understand, why am I so jumpy? It's like, well, that makes perfect sense why I'm jumpy if it's living in that more primal part of my brain, right? It's just a sensitivity, and that's okay. Understanding it really helped. So I did find resources online that would help just in terms of understanding the neuroscience behind it. Crisis Text Line has a number of free resources on their website if you're looking for a place to start for any number of different types of situations. And then I've reached out, and there's group programs through a company called BetterHelp. And I found just for me that doing it online sometimes is a little bit easier than going in person, in part because of my schedule, in part just because of my comfort level. And so if you are that way, and I am a little bit introverted, and when safety is my concern, I'm a little bit hesitant to maybe go in groups of strangers to talk about some of these things because now I'm being vulnerable in front of people I don't know. And so I found that for myself personally, that finding a lot of these online resources was really helpful. I think sometimes other people don't take them as seriously or don't think that they're valuable, but what's valuable is what works for you. And you don't have to apologize to anybody for what exactly that is, as long as it's healthy.
You were working with an organization at that time. Do you think organizations should be trained in at least basic communication and trauma responses?
I do. And I think that sort of agnostic of what happened to me, I feel that just even from my perspective as an HR professional, there's this idea that people come to work and somehow show up and leave everything else that's going on at home. But I think that that's just based on a flawed premise. And if your objective as an employer is to get the best performance out of people, right? If your objective as a coach is to get the best performance out of your athlete, if your perspective as a lawyer is to get the best performance out of your attorneys working on your legal team, I do think that it's important to recognize that people are whole people and their performance will be impacted not just by what may be going on at home, but frankly by what's going on in the world. The day after the Las Vegas shooting at the Route 66 concert, me and two other coworkers, we all came into the office. We were all a bit distracted and having trouble focusing. And we finally just admitted to each other that we're all sort of just deeply hurt by what had happened and what we were feeling. And so we spent 15, 20 minutes just talking about it, talking about how we felt. And then we went back to work. So I'm not saying that it needs to somehow overtake or that it's the organization's responsibility necessarily to solve for it, but to recognize in the same way that we do for physical health care, that mental health care is just an integral part of it. To me, that's the right way to think about it. It is self-care. Your employees need to be healthy so that you can get the best performance out of them and you can get the longest tenure out of them if that's what you're looking for, that you can get their discretionary effort. So why not invest in it as a resource? And then the flip side to it is, as great as our job is, our job is pretty public. There's also plenty of moments that people will never know about or never see, but those are some of the things that are the most meaningful to me and just help me sleep better at night, knowing that I've been able to help somebody else.
Yeah. You said that healing wasn't about bouncing back. It was about rebuilding piece by piece. What were some of those first small wins that made you at least feel like you were taking life back and that there was normalcy, was at least a goal that was attainable?
And so, in terms of normalcy, what I would say is that there was a new normal. And so it wasn't necessarily bouncing back to where I was. It was, how can I feel most like myself, knowing that there's a part of me that's changed? And so, 6 months after it had happened, I got a dog, which I had not had before. I was single at the time. And, I just remember thinking, if one of the challenges that I'm having is being by myself and I live alone, I don't know exactly how I'm going to take care of it. I'm not sure what the details are, but I think that getting a dog will be good for me. And can I tell you that I love this dog more than anything in the world? And I'm sorry to my husband. And that dog loves me and protects me more than anything I've ever met in my entire life. And so it's not that it went back to normal. It's that it's better. Because I learned you want to know what true unconditional love is? Yeah. You get a pet who's not gonna, who doesn't care about what else is going on in your life. They know that you're there. They're happy when you're home and they want to go outside and go on walks, which is exactly what I think is a really free way to be in nature and to work on deep breathing, which really helps to calm your nervous system.
That's what I was going to get in towards now, because I know there'll be people listening, myself included, that you don't know when anxiety is going to come on you. Like something is planned. That's why they call it anxiety or fear when it shows up. How do you manage triggers in real time or at home, at work, or even in public?
So I'll talk about all of them because there's a few different ones. So at work, what was really interesting is that a week after burglary, so that following Memorial Day, the wrestling company was still filming here. They ran out of female extras to be in a segment, which was a bar fight. And so I was still there at the office helping them. And me and one of our production folks and the woman that rings the bell and times the matches, all three of us ended up being set extras in this segment. And so we're doing one of the first takes, and it's late at night, maybe like 3 o'clock in the morning. And again, folks had known what had happened because I had talked about it right after. And during one of the first takes, the guys start fighting. They start coming towards me. And my cue was to just get up from my seat and run out of the scene, right? Normal, whatever. And apparently the first time I ran so fast out of the scene, they're like, cut. They're like, slow down. We couldn't even get you because you got away so quick. And I was like, well, that's why I'm alive right now. And we all just honestly had like a moment of just laughing. And so I think some of that too, which is realizing like, look, you can take something serious. You don't have to be sad about it all the time. Like in that moment, it was like, hey guys, I'm here. I'm trying to help. But like, this is literally my worst nightmare that we're recreating a week later. And so some of that was just bringing levity to it. But the other was that I do have a playlist on my phone, which I started around this time. And I know that those songs immediately make me feel better. And it was with a little bit of time that I realized their common thread in a lot of them, in addition to them just being music that I like, is that they all have a really consistent drum beat. And so what I didn't realize is that as I was listening to these songs and going on walks, I was regulating my like stepping and I was regulating my breathing to the music. So the one that I listened to really frequently around that time is a song by Eric Church called Never Break Heart. And in addition to the lyrics, it's just that consistent rhythm was really helpful to me at the time. You know, there were nights where I did things like sleep with the lights on, and people really didn't understand why I was doing that or what I was doing, but it helped. There were nights when I slept with certain songs or movies on repeat because it's familiar. And so if you've suffered from trauma, things that are not surprising are really helpful to you because you can have a safe environment.
So public.
So look, a few things, especially if you're in like a job, right? I learned that apparently if you sort of hug yourself, which can just look like you're crossing your arms for the most part, that's a good way to calm your nervous system. For me, one of the other things that work is just tapping on my chest. And those are things that you can do in public without being obvious that you're doing it. I also got a small stone. It's just like a heart-shaped stone that I ordered off of Amazon, but I would carry it with me. And then anytime I felt like my body was starting to tense, I would hold it almost as a tool just to ground myself. And then similarly started traveling with just a tiny bottle of a mixture of like essential oils that's designed to help calm your nervous system. It's like a roll-on, and you just have it so that the goal for me in that moment is that when your mind starts to go into a state of panic, using something to remind it, hey, this is familiar, this is comfortable, this is safe.
Interesting. I would never have guessed those things, but interesting. Music, yes, of course, therapeutic, but regulating breathing with rhythm makes sense. Yeah, those are all great things. I would have never thought of that. I mean, we're talking about retraining the nervous system, and I know you've talked about that in some of the other episodes. Or what did that look like day to day to try to retrain your nervous system?
So the really incredible thing about your brain is that it's got an elasticity to it, right? So they talk about neuroplasticity, which means that through repetition, whether it's positive or negative, you build these neural pathways. And so I never thought that I would be the sort of person that said positive affirmations, but there are times when I feel unsafe, including at home. And if I'm by myself, what I find is that I got like a big sheet of poster board from CVS, and I'll write on it in a marker that just says, you are safe, or I am safe. I am like blessed. I am grateful. Like I have a house, like a roof over my head. I have a house that I'm in, right? I got my dog with me by my side. And even just that sometimes really helps just to ground my breathing and get my brain to remember that, hey, every day is not the worst day of your life. Of the 40 years that I've been on earth, that was one night of it, right? Just one. It's not all of them by any means. And there's far more positive experiences. But as you mentioned, our brains get used to focusing on the negative ones because they just want us to survive. But you have to realize that you have to retrain your brain and your body to realize that it is okay when things appear to be threats that activate you. You have to learn how to manage, is that a real threat or not?
You had a support system that you built around you. Did you ever struggle with feeling like a burden?
I feel like a burden every time I feel like I'm calling my one friend too many times to talk about the same thing. I've sometimes felt like a burden just because of what had happened. And there were moments where I was definitely angry at times, thinking, what did I do to deserve this? Knowing what other people experience in the world, there's moments when I'm also recoil at how spoiled and selfish that seems because I was okay in the end. But at the same time, it's just, what's the thoughts that go through my head, especially because I've had some traumatic experience after that, including, a fight at work that was just might have been okay in and of itself, but coming on the heels of this experience was a little bit more difficult to deal with. I had a former employee that was harassing me after he was let go. That was a little bit more challenging to deal with than it might have otherwise been, just because of some of the other things that I had experienced. And I remember thinking at some point, what's the point of being a good person if you're still going to end up being subjected to these things? And then in moments of clarity, of course, when it passes, what I sort of realize is I truly don't think I've had any sort of anxiety up until the burglary happened. But now that it's done, I can't move. And I texted a friend who does have anxiety, and I said, I don't really understand what's happening. And he goes, welcome to the experience that the rest of us have. And I'll be honest with you, I really didn't understand it. You actually have to go through it. When you have to walk and sit in those flames yourself, it forges you in a much different way.
What about boundaries? After this took place, did you find yourself saying, building fences or boundaries around places you'd go, people you'd be with, things you used to do, not so much anymore? Are boundaries helpful? And if so, how? And if not, maybe why not?
Sure. So I think there's actually some that are helpful and some that are not. The ones that are not are the ones when I let my fear dictate what I'm going to do. So what I did find is that there were times, like with this employee that was harassing me, I got a little bit nervous about leaving the house. And then what your brain learns is that, okay, the house is a safe place. And I realized that I was withdrawn and that I needed to test myself a bit in terms of going out and being around people again, as opposed to just withdrawing completely, right? You might say that that's a boundary, that I'm protecting my peace, but frankly, I was protecting my peace too much. The flip side to that is, yes, like what a unreasonable dose of perspective on what's important in life is realizing that you might not have woken up today. I was like, I don't know when that feeling goes away, but I wake up every morning grateful that I'm here, because that night went the way that it went. And I do have a bit of pride about the fact that, thanks to the 2 self-defense classes I've ever taken in my life, I was able to keep myself safe, but that could have gone very differently. When your baseline is that, hey, I'm lucky that I woke up this morning, the rest is sort of just details. People that aren't capable necessarily or aren't willing to do the work to put themselves in my shoes to understand what this type of fear is like, they're not probably the safest people for me to be open and vulnerable with. People that aren't interested in learning how trauma impacts the brain, thank goodness that some of these people have not gone through it. They may not ever understand, and they don't have to.
Do you have one particular boundary that you've set that is an absolute now, that you make sure is never crossed, or that is a safeguard that you weren't doing before you were faced with that terrifying night?
I do a much better job of waking up every single morning and saying to myself that no matter what else is going to happen in this day, for as long as I can and for as long as I'm able, I'm going to move my body in a way that makes me happy today, right? Whether that's exercising, playing guitar, walking the dog, whatever else it might be. But I no longer am too busy or run out of time to do that thing that's going to be just the thing that I do for myself that day.
I'm going to go way out in right field for a minute. You've talked about, I've heard you mention, I mentioned it in my opening, guitar, and I've read a lot about you, and it always starts with guitar. Where did music come into your life? Was that as a young girl, as a teenager? And what role does that maybe play in therapy?
I love music. I will never make a living off of music. I'm just not good enough. I don't have that talent, which is okay.
Yeah.
So I've been playing the drums since I was 9, started playing guitar when I was 12. But I'm a pretty shy person, which people don't realize. And so I never really played in front of people at all. And then, college came and you get busy and you move and you don't play quite as much. And I didn't play as much during law school. And when I moved to Jacksonville is when I really started playing more again, but still wasn't comfortable playing in front of people. And my friend who had passed that we had talked about earlier, when we were kids growing up, he would say, and I'm sincere when I say it's like I'm a nerdy introvert, like I liked going to school. I liked class. I just enjoyed it. I still do. And he would say, Megha, you are good at everything besides having fun. And he's not wrong about that. And on the year anniversary of his death, I remember thinking, I'm going to prove you wrong. So on March 5th of 2018 was the very first time that I took my acoustic guitar. I went to a dive bar down the street and I played for 3 hours in front of mostly friends and family. And that's the hardest thing that I've ever done, because you are so vulnerable. It is so stressful. It does take a significant amount of concentration and effort for me to do that. And I thought that I'd be one and done and I'd never do it again because like this is it. I just want to do it one time in front of people. And again, it's all friends and family at a small bar down the street. I just finished my 10th one. So I've only done it about once or twice a year since then, which is all that I really have the time to do, which is okay.
Good on you.
But my parents were in town. And so it was the first time that my parents, who paid for all of these guitar lessons, got to see me sing and play live. And there's nothing about it that's necessarily going to help me with my job. There's nothing about it in terms of like, oh, I'm going to make a bunch of money doing this, but I do it for the joy because, we talked about this, but I firmly believe that music is medicine. And the reality is like nobody is expecting me to be so, given where I'm playing, no one's expecting me to be like some earth shattering talent, and I'm not. But people love singing along to songs that they like that remind them of happy memories. And I'm just glad that I can do that for people once or twice a year and do it for myself. I think you mentioned something earlier just in terms of authenticity. And I think that is so critical. I never really felt like I quite fit in. And I don't mean this in any way that's like trying to elicit any sort of sympathy, but I was a little girl growing up in New Jersey who loved heavy metal music and loved baseball and also loved school. I went to school and went to law school, and people thought that I was a little bit nuts for moving from Manhattan to Jacksonville, but I actually love living in Jacksonville and I love being by the beach and I enjoy the warm weather. At some point I just decided, and I'm 40 now. I didn't get married until I was 39, so just about a year ago, which is something that a lot of people have plenty of opinions on, interestingly enough. And I remember just thinking at some point, you know what? Everyone should assert their own right to be complex. You don't have to fit into anybody else's narrative. And so if somebody says, hey, we're not what you think of, or you're not the stereotypical what we think of in terms of an NFL lawyer. You know what? I don't know what you thought in your mind. I don't know what I thought in my mind of what that person ought to look like or be like, but I'm here and my job is to do a great job, not to come into a form that makes other people uncomfortable or to live a life that makes other people feel comfortable. In terms of how the trauma's impacted my leadership overall, I do think that it's really given me, when we're talking about anxiety, it's just given me a different perspective. And it teaches you that, look, all behaviors are certainly not acceptable in all situations, but feelings are, and you can treat somebody with empathy, even if you are in a moment where they may no longer be with the organization. You don't have to discard them. You can still treat them like a human being. One of my closest friends to this day is somebody whose employment I had to terminate while he was in rehab. Extremely difficult thing to do and just heartbreaking for him. But I remember thinking at the time, as best as I know, he doesn't have a support system around him at home. He didn't have a family that he can necessarily go to. A lot of people weren't really speaking with him at the time. And I said, no matter what happens in terms of the fact that you're no longer with this company, you have my phone number. You are never alone. And I still talk to him to this day pretty regularly. And he's somebody that I rely on. And he is currently thinking about going back to school to become a counselor himself.
Oh, wow. That's a great story. You obviously lead a team of people there, and probably many of them have unseen struggles, just as when I was pastoring, knowing that, you're looking at faces, not knowing what's going on inside them. How have you made or implemented strategies so like psychology and mental health is safe for them to have these conversations, whether it's with you or with anyone else?
So when I did get trained through Crisis Text Line, I did let everybody at the company know that. And so I let them know that, hey, look, we, in terms of skill sets that we have at the organization, this is a new one that we have and that we have to offer you. Of course, we have programs also through our more traditional employee, like medical care programs. And then I'm actually very excited about this. We just recently launched a company-wide initiative where everybody gets trained through an organization called Be Nice about how to notice, invite, challenge, and empower anybody who you might see struggling. So as much as I think that I might be approachable or relatable, and for some people I am, I can also understand why for a lot of people, they don't want to go talk to the lawyer about how it is that they're feeling. Fair enough. And so what I try to do is make sure that people know, look, all that I'm asking is that if somebody is struggling, you notice it and you use your voice or your position to help them go seek the help that they might need. And so I don't need to know why it is, who's struggling and what it is that they're struggling with. But I do hope to create an environment where people feel comfortable coming to me anonymously. If somebody needs help, I'm more than happy to offer resources, no questions asked. That's okay. Or if somebody really needs help and they do feel comfortable with me, then Now, there's nothing else more important than finding the time to do that. And the other stuff can always get done. And if I have to work a little bit later because I've been helping somebody who's struggling in a moment, that's time well spent. And that's the important stuff in life anyway. But try to be as honest as I can be about the fact that, hey, I'm a human being too. And like you said, like this terrible thing happened to me. We can talk about it as an organization, and we can talk about the healthy coping skills that you need to have so that as the world continues to turn the temperature up on the chaos that we're all living in, we're here as an organization. We're here to help. And look, everybody does have mental health. The challenge I think that people need to understand is that it's also your responsibility to help others with their mental health and to take ownership of your own.
You had mentioned that it wasn't just your trauma. It was kind of an organizational trauma that your team walked through. What did recovery look like collectively for the Jaguars organization?
So I'd say that it's two things, right? It was creating safe spaces where if people were struggling, and this is true after any, call it, crisis that will impact an organization. I think it's really important to give people the opportunity. So that could be a death of an employee, that could be, anything that happens. Give people a space where they can go speak with somebody and let them know what resources are available, right? You may be experiencing grief. Here are resources that are available to you. We had an employee who passed, and we went ahead and, yes, we talked about it and had a company-wide meeting about it. We also deployed significant resources where it's like, hey, you don't have to use us as your place to admit that you're struggling, but here are some resources that you can use that are specific to grief going forward. And then sometimes, frankly, I think when you do that a little bit, it's also okay, and we're an entertainment company at the end, to go back and realize that let's go focus on some of the fun. You can be sad, but that doesn't mean that you can have a sad thing happen. It doesn't mean you're going to be sad all the time, right? That, football is at its best a connector of people and something for a lot of people to rally around and enjoy and be a part of. Same with music. And we do have an amphitheater that we operate with concerts. And it's like, let's go do that. Let's go have fun. Let's go put on the best show that we can. Let's make some happy memories for ourselves, make some happy memories for some other people, and just diving a little bit also back in while acknowledging the bad thing that happened, but realizing that you don't have to carry the weight all by yourself and you don't have to hide it. But it doesn't have to be the only thing that you focus on either.
All right. Before we get to my famous rapid fire round, what's one of the proudest moments since coming back that you're most proud of? Maybe felt like redemption in some way?
Yeah, look, I don't know that it was necessarily redemption, but I'll say that two things happened in August of 23 in pretty quick succession. One is that we had an employee who I had no idea was struggling with pretty severe addiction issues. And on a Sunday morning, as I was going to the beach, I got a phone call that said that. And they said that the only person that he wants to help take him to rehab is you. And I said, okay. And so I called him and he said, just give me a couple hours and I promise you I will go. And he was pretty out of it. And I took him. And a month later, when he got out, he said, I'm just glad that you were there because I don't know who else I would have gone to or called in that moment. And he also grew up in the Northeast. And it just reminded me that, maybe I wasn't able to help my friend, but a few years later, I was at least able to help somebody else.
There. That's great. All right. No lawyer spin, no lawyer talk. Whatever comes to mind. We're going to close with this. If your dog Champ could talk, what would he tell us would be your craziest quirks?
Having endless conversations with him all the time.
Finish the sentence. I know I'm thriving where life finds me when
I'm on the beach.
Your go-to song when you need an instant confident boost.
Never Break Heart by Eric Church. I also have tattooed on me.
Okay. What's one food or guilty pleasure that most always brings you comfort?
Ice cream.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah. All right, last one. If you could trade jobs with anyone in the world for one day, what would it be?
John Bon Jovi in a heartbeat. Yeah. You know why? Because as a little girl growing up, it was so funny. People would sometimes present it as, oh, like, do you want to marry Bon Jovi? I'm like, no, I want to be John Bon Jovi. I just loved that. And, it's so many moments of my childhood and life are punctuated by his songs, their songs. And what a great thing to mean to people.
Megha, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for sharing, a very personal story. I hope it's helpful to someone out there that's listening, dealing with a PTSD or a fear or anxiety, telling us what are the steps to take. For people that may want to connect with you or get resources that you've talked about in our conversation, how can they find that and get in touch or get those resources? resources?
I'm so glad that you asked that. So one, I'm on LinkedIn, though I don't always necessarily respond to those messages
Sure.
quickly, but please find me there. Or I'm on Instagram as Mega Legal Girl 10. I do tend to see those messages just a little bit more quickly. And I often use Instagram to follow accounts where I find that there is really interesting information about neuroscience, trauma recovery, nutrition, fitness, and health. And so I really think it's got its ills, but when you use it to find those sorts of resources, I think it's tremendous. So either of those platforms is definitely the easiest way.
Very good. Friends, thanks for taking time to tune in to the SwagAbility Show. We're honored that you took time to be part of our journey. Here at SwagAbility, our heart is to encourage you in your walk with faith, to lift your spirits when they're heavy, and to help you learn to thrive wherever life finds you. Until next time, friends, Swags out.